let me indicate that the meeting, the Joint Committees of Foreign Affairs and Defense and Interior had with the security ministers, the three security ministers, the Defense Minister, the National Security Minister, and the Interior Minister, was convened and under certain protocols that the committees would usually adapt. And so once the ministers appear and give indication that the discussions are supposed to be confidential, usually we are bound not to make disclosures. But I can tell you for a fact that the discussions centered on the unfolding situation in Niger and the response of ECOWAS. Now, as you would recall, ECOWAS Authority of Heads of State and Government took a decision from the beginning when the junta in Niger overthrew President Bazoum. And the decision of ECOWAS was that they would use military force to restore democracy in Niger. Now, when those threats were issued, many thought that, look, ECOWAS had made a mistake because in the first instance, ECOWAS ought to have used diplomacy to try to resolve the crisis rather than threatening to use force in Niger. And those who held those views, and I am one of the people who held the view that ECOWAS should have exhausted diplomacy before moving a step further to declare that they would use military force to restore the President Bazoum's regime in Niger. Now, having said that, the question is whether Ghana is obliged under ECOWAS protocols and can deploy troops without recourse to Parliament. I think that that is the issue which has engaged our attention, and it was one. I would make that particular disclosure because it's not inimical to the protocols we set for ourselves, because I have been speaking to that issue all along, that whether or not we are bound by ECOWAS protocols to apply force under a 1999 protocol, which is supposed to be a revised protocol or not, Ghana is a sovereign state. And we have certain obligations under Article 75 of the Constitution, which requires that whatever decisions are taken at the level of ECOWAS, if there are treaty obligations arising from whatever we ratify at the level of the executive, then there ought to be a second level of ratification at the level of Parliament. Now, I've been searching to see whether some of the protocols that have been revised have been ratified either by legislation or resolution in Parliament, and I am not able to identify when Parliament actually took steps to, as it were, domesticate those obligations in a manner that would make those obligations fully binding on us as a state. So we're talking about the 1999 revised protocol, which establishes some collective security mechanism for ECOWAS, which allows them to apply force when there are massive violations of rights, when governments are overthrown by force. I'm talking about coup d'etats.
Yes.
And when the rule of law in general is compromised. You see, those protocols, I am not very certain, have been domesticated.
Without the evidence of...
Mr. Okansi, that is one level of argument.
Okay.
For me, what is fundamental is that...
I just wanted to stay on that particular bit of, if there is no evidence of a ratification of these ECOWAS protocols by our parliament, what are the implications? What does that mean? Because you say you haven't even found any... Yes,
I haven't. I've been conducting some research, and I haven't found anything to suggest that Ghana took those steps. Be that as it may, and you be mindful. The Gitmo decision was very clear. All right, when Ghana, took certain steps, we went into some agreements with the United States to host former terrorists in our country. Some people went to court, and the Supreme Court was very clear that whatever the executive did was subject to parliamentary ratification, and that next time when we commit ourselves on the international plane, we must take steps to have whatever decisions we took over there ratified by Parliament. And having said that, look, I heard Abdul Fattah make certain comments after yesterday's meeting that the standby force was going to be funded by ECOWAS. However, there was a caveat. They were willing to accept support from friends, friendly nations, etc. Now, Mr. Okasi, what does that tell you? It means the funding is something that goes with war, declaration of war. You cannot deploy troops when you haven't budgeted for the expenditure that would arise from such interventions. Now, as we sit here, you know why it is compelling that the President Akufo-Addo's government must come to Parliament, table the decisions taken at the level of ECOWAS for parliamentary approvals?
No.
We don't have any appropriation for any war in Niger. And so if Ghana has to commit troops, how do we fund the troops? From which sources? Because we haven't done any appropriation for any war effort in Niger. Do you now understand why it is compelling that they must come before Parliament?
But what will be your response if they say they are going to use the contingency vote?
They would use the contingency vote.
The one they use for the national cathedral. I'm just asking.
But we have made the point that the funding, we were misled into thinking that the national cathedral was going to be constructed from donations.
Yeah.
Nobody gave a hint that they were going to rely on contingency. So our arguments have been that the appropriations that were done for the cathedral project are illegal and should be treated as such. So please, you may not find a clear-cut provision in the Constitution which requires that if the president has to declare war, he must come before Parliament for approval. There is no such provision in the Constitution.
It's not in the spirit.
But the spirit requires that, look, before you commit Ghanaian lives, people's husbands, people's relatives to war where they could die, you need the people's consent to act in such a manner. And how do you gauge whether the people are interested in a war effort or not, other than going through their representatives, where the people speak through people they have elected to represent them in the National Assembly. So you see, I think we must be forthright and do the right thing. In Nigeria, the Congress actually debated the decision of ECOWAS to go to war and admonished their president not to. Governors of the northern states came out, issued a communique. They should not move. Northern senators, even aside the resolution the Congress passed, also came out and stated categorically that they are opposed to any application of force in Niger. And we see, most fundamentally, questions have been raised whether ECOWAS collective mechanism can entitle them to apply force without recourse to the UN Security Council. I'm a student of international law. I've gone through the ECOWAS example is novel. In fact, it is the first time a regional body like ECOWAS has assumed or arrogated unto itself the power to apply force without recourse to the UN Security Council. So it is not a straightforward matter. You can give us examples. The ECOWAS has intervened in Liberia before and etc. In most of the cases, after the act, the UN Security Council was called upon to ratify whatever they did. So we must be careful here, and if time will permit, we would even point out that you see, when you have an international convention which is selectively applied, as in the case of the ECOWAS protocol, that they are seeking to selectively apply here, well, that is not binding law. You apply a law in a discriminatory manner. So when there are abuses, massive violation of rights in member states. ECOWAS doesn't act. When Burkina Faso is virtually overrun by terrorists, terrorists abuse rights. In Burkina Faso, the territorial integrity of the country has been compromised. ECOWAS didn't find it necessary to apply force in aid of the Burkinabe regime to assert its rights over its own territory. But when a government which has been entangled in neo-colonialist enterprises, etc., in the country is booted out, immediately ECOWAS invokes its collective mechanism and the 1999 protocol. That is questionable. I am not by any stretch supporting coups, not at all. I am saying that, look, sanctions are enough.
Okay.
Already the UN itself has written and has faulted ECOWAS for creating humanitarian problems because of the nature of the sanctions they have imposed against Niger. I'm sure we will discuss that.
We will get into that. James, there was a specific reference to a statement that you had made earlier about the ratification of these protocols. That's what Fatima was talking about. Briefly, and then I'll go to...
Alfred, you see, in 2016, when Ghana, under the leadership of President Mahama, took part in ECOWAS' decision to go to the Gambia, that was getting towards the latter part of 2016. Unfortunately for us, we lost power. The actual deployment happened after we had lost power, which is why when we started speaking out, you know, and giving indication that there was the need for the deployment to have been approved by Parliament, the minister, this same minister, Honorable Nituwul, then came to Parliament and read a statement in relation to that same matter. Then we debated his statement and admonished him never to commit us to a war in the future without recourse to Parliament. So these are the facts. We were not in charge.
Right, okay.
At the time the deployment happened. So, and like Lawyer Pebu rightly pointed out, ratification or, if you like, consent may have been given at the executive level when we were in power. But that did not absolve us from further responsibility of bringing the matter before Parliament, you know, for ratification. There are two levels of ratification here. We need to take that into account.
Okay. The UN about whatever decision ECOWAS will take. The ambassador Abdel Fattah Musa said they don't necessarily have to do so. Is that consistent with the position of the law?
Look, I think the UN Charter is very clear. It's very clear. In the event that force must be applied legally, the only body mandated to give authorization is the UN Security Council. Anything short of that would amount to a violation of international law. That is the position right now under international law. You see, in my preliminary remarks, I made the point that the arrangement whereby regional bodies such as ECOWAS is allowed to adapt for itself security mechanisms, which then gives it the power to apply force without recourse to the UN, is a novelty. It's a complete novelty. And so we need to juxtapose what the ECOWAS security mechanism under the 1999 protocol says with what the UN Charter says. If you ask me in terms of a ranking hierarchy, I wouldn't rank a sub-regional convention over and above what the UN Charter
itself,
the world body says. I wouldn't do so. So we must marry the two, try to reconcile the two protocols and determine what is appropriate in the circumstances. But you see, Dr. Abdel Fattah admitted that after everything, they would inform the UN Security Council. How is that? In what manner? But you see, Alfred, I've seen a letter which was written on the 17th August and addressed to ECOWAS. I don't know whether Dr. Abdel Fattah has seen that letter. This is coming from the UN. And the UN, according to this letter, is warning of the impact of the sweeping nature of the sanctions that ECOWAS has so far slapped on Niger.
On the humanitarian
Those sanctions have created a humanitarian crisis in Niger. Prior to the imposition of ECOWAS sanctions, we didn't have a humanitarian situation in Niger, even in the aftermath of the coup. Now, if economic sanctions can inflict so much pain and create a humanitarian catastrophe in Niger, come to think about the repercussions of war. If you send in boots, and Prof has given us a vivid account of what is happening on the ground, in contradistinction to what happened in Gambia. You have Russians, getting involved. France. The Americans are there. France is there. Look, if care is not taken, Niger would become another Ukraine for us. It's going to be a disastrous war which would pitch African armies against themselves. Is that what we want?
No.
Africans should march in there and kill fellow Africans?
No.
Is that what we want?
No.
You want the Hausas from northern Nigeria to descend on their brothers in Niamey? That is going to be a disaster for us. So, you see, in as much as we don't support coups, I don't support a coup either. Why? I'm an MP. If there is a coup in this country today, we would be amongst the first to be asked to report to the nearest police station. In our own interest. So you know what that means. But we must speak to truth. In 2001, when the ECOWAS was about... Yes, I'm winding up. To adapt a protocol on good governance. Arguments had been made, proposals for term limits to be adapted as part of that protocol. What did the leaders of ECOWAS at the time do? They shut down the proposals for term limits. And that is what allowed people like Alpha Condé, even next door Côte d'Ivoire, to manipulate constitutions and perpetuate their stay in power. So Prof spoke about good governance as the antidote to coups. ECOWAS should become serious in condemning, constitutional manipulations, bad governance, when people are killed for demonstrating. Well, those are political rights guaranteed under so many international conventions, etc.